Hello and welcome to the Faith Report, and this is today's episode of Spiritual Spotlight. Today we're going to go on a journey through ancient prophecies of the Old Testament and seeing them fulfilled in the New Testament. Hopefully it will blow your mind. We'll discover how God revealed intricate details about the coming Messiah hundreds of years in advance, from his birthplace to the precise manner of his death. And it's astonishing how prophets of old predicted Jesus' life with pinpoint accuracy centuries before he even walked on the earth. So let's get started with his birthplace, Bethlehem. Why was that so significant, I hear you ask? Well, it's because Bethlehem was such a tiny, insignificant village, yet the prophet Micah named it specifically as the place where the Messiah would be born. Imagine if I told you that a specific president of the United States would be born in a small town that you've never heard of. And sure enough, hundreds of years later, that's exactly where that specific president was born. And that is what makes Micah's prophecy so extraordinary. Out of all the prominent cities in Israel, Jerusalem, Nazareth, etc., Micah said Bethlehem, and he was exactly right, as documented in Matthew 2. But it gets even more unbelievable. The prophet Isaiah said the Messiah would be born to a virgin. Now think about that for a minute. A virgin birth is totally biologically impossible. It's never happened before. Yet Isaiah predicted it 700 years before Jesus was born. And as we see in Matthew 1:23, Mary gave birth to him as a virgin, fulfilling Isaiah's prophecy perfectly. A one-of-a-kind birth predicted centuries in advance. Now, let's go to the week of Jesus' crucifixion. 500 years before, the prophet Zechariah said the Messiah would arrive in Jerusalem humbly riding a donkey. Now this might sound like no big deal, but Zechariah wrote this prophecy at a time when kings and rulers only rode stallions and chariots, never donkeys. Yet sure enough, on Palm Sunday, Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a humble donkey, just as Zechariah had said centuries earlier. Then, 700 plus years later, Jesus is crucified and scripture records it all happening exactly as prophesied centuries earlier. The level of divine prophecy is beyond human explanation. And it keeps getting even more specific. 1,000 years before crucifixion was even invented, King David and Isaiah described this brutal execution method in graphic detail. They talked about pierced hands and feet, casting lots for clothing, and being numbered among the transgressors. How could they know such precise detail about a method of execution not even invented yet? Then, 700 years later, Jesus is crucified and scripture records it all happening exactly as prophesied centuries earlier. The level of divine prophecy is beyond human explanation. And finally, we have the resurrection. After his crucifixion, Jesus rose from the dead 3 days later, defying all biological possibility. But it was prophesied 1,000 years before by King David himself. Psalm 16 says, God will not let his body decay, and he would not be abandoned to the grave. And against all odds, that's exactly what happened to Jesus. So in closing, if you want to hear more about that and explore some evidence to support the resurrection actually happening, click on this video here. Until next time, keep the faith.